In 2020, Troma Entertainment acquired a catalog of films by North American Pictures. It made me more interested in that company, and I did a deep dive into some of the films that they created. I picked 4 films to talk about: TC-2000 and Tiger Claws 1, 2, and 3. And stay tuned for the end of the documentary where we do an interview with Lloyd Kaufman and Debbie Rochon.
In a time just beyond tomorrow, when the surface world has become a war zone, the underworld cities have become electronic fortresses, and the only hope is an ex-cop and an executioner.
Death to the underworld!
They killed his partner and created the perfect killing machine.
I give to you the TC-2000X.
The TC-2000X was conceived to protect the people in my quadrant. That was her sole purpose.
So is me! So is stop it!
Let me show you what real power feels like.
They're destroying the surface world.
I know.
Show me! Nicky Picasso's going down. With you or without you?
I waited a long time for this moment. You killed my partner. My time to leave.
Surface world cleansing will commence at T-minus 10 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2.
Starring Bolo Yeung, Jalal Mereh, Billy Blanks, Matthias Hughes, TC-2000.
So that was the trailer to TC-2000. I should talk about Billy Blanks first. He was born in 1955. Billy Blanks earned a name for himself in the 1970s and 80s when he won a series of martial arts competitions. A 7-time world karate champion, he was captain of the U.S. karate team and won 36 gold medals in international competition. So a lot of people think of Billy Blanks as this guy, the exercise video guy. He did, Taebo and created this exercise trend, which is worth millions and millions of dollars. He's a incredibly successful athlete and, health guru, whatever you want to call him. But, when he started out in his career, he had a legitimate martial arts career, highly accomplished. And from there, he went into martial arts films. So in the video store era, Bloodsport and Kickboxer come out with Jean-Claude Van Damme, and there was a lot of sort of fervor for that type of thing. So movies like King of the Kickboxers got some additional attention, and older films, were sort of dusted off and re-released and stuff like that. So Billy Blanks really cut his teeth doing these movies. Some of them did show in some theaters, but a lot of them were direct-to-video. So this North American Pictures film, TC-2000, it's very hard to find a budget on this thing. It was definitely under $500,000. There's just no way it's not. So part of the documentary, I want to concentrate on this idea that there were several martial artists that had fame in the time when their films were out on video. The film also stars Bolo Yeung. Bolo Yeung really doesn't need an introduction. He's known as the Chinese Hercules. and was in Enter the Dragon, you know. So the guy's just a legend. So the guys at North American Pictures, you know that they were making some pretty cool casting decisions when they were putting this movie together. This film essentially was advertised as a sort of futuristic Terminator 2 / Escape from New York scenario. When you went to the video store, you didn't know exactly when a film was sort of B grade or A grade. You didn't always know, because sometimes the cover was just super hot. And back then, if you didn't know all the stars, you know, you're just starting to rent movies, let's say you're a teenager or you're in your 20s, you are fully aware that you don't know, you know, everyone in Hollywood. And but you might say, oh, Bolo Yeung, he's from Enter the Dragon, you know, so you rent this thing. Even though the budget is probably somewhere around $300,000, you have a situation where it's shot all on location. They're obviously using real factories. They're using real. You can see there's a sort of control booth in the beginning. It looks like some kind of power facility they're in, and it looks like they got a few locations in which they could sort of build a believable story in which this is sort of an underground bunker type scenario. They're using lasers and smoke to sort of create what looks like force fields. They're using, you know, a lot of real motorcycles. They're using real stunt people. There was a pretty awesome fire stunt. There is a lot of fighting. And this is what I think is smart about TC-2000. They didn't have a ton of money for special effects. So as long as they can shoot most of the stuff in a location that feels industrial or post-industrial, you know, like it could be sci-fi-ish. If they just had a lot of fight scenes between characters, they could essentially make a 90-minute film in this way. And it's smart because it's a lot of action, but it's just people. It's literally a fight between one or two people. It cuts away. It's a fight between two other people. And so what you have is some pretty entertaining action, but you're not bleeding money. It's not giant set pieces. It's not like an oil tanker crashing into the beach or something, you know. So films like this are smart in some of the ways they figure out a way to make action for cheap. And so in that sense, Billy Blanks is an incredibly gifted martial artist. So you can see there are scenes in TC-2000 where you're like, you know, he's doing these crazy double kicks. You know, there's, you know, his form is amazing. There's some really cool slow motion shots. They're using him well. Bolo Yeung, who's just brilliant martial artist and super famous, it feels like they don't really give him that much to do that is spectacular. He has some fight scenes, but there's no real showcases, you know. But, you know, back when you were watching these direct-to-video films, if you saw a couple wild martial, you know, kicks, karate kicks, you'd rewind that, you watch it over again. I mean, it was pretty awesome. Like, people were just easier to please. I mean, that's the easiest way to put it. When you were renting something, it was precious, and you kind of knew you had to commit to it because you paid the $5 for it. So you were going to go home and watch that thing, and you were going to give it the benefit of the doubt. And, you know, now the viewing audience is really cynical. They really they don't like low-budget stuff, you know. For narrative, they hate that. But when it really comes to narrative, they judge pretty harshly. If you were in your late teens and early 20s in the mid-90s, and you went to a video store, you might think that Billy Blanks was the same thing as like a Jean-Claude Van Damme. I think that was the illusion of the sort of direct-to-video era. That's what they capitalized on. Can you cut a trailer that looks sort of like a Hollywood trailer? Can you make the box art that looks sort of like a Hollywood box art, you know? But these films were actually produced well enough for them to be entertaining. And that's what they are. It's an entertaining film. Is it good sci-fi? Well, that's debatable. But there's some really great stunts. And when you're watching it, I never understood when someone was totally bored by a film, especially when there's always something to look at. The lighting, you know, the characters, the story, the set design, the sound, the score, all these different things that you can view, you know. I mean, if it's some crappy Netflix series, of course, you could lose attention and say there's just an empty, you know, filler of time, you know. But I would actually argue that some of these action films at this point, the ones that were in the, you know, late 80s and early 90s, are sort of a window into the culture, and I guess that's always been the case for films. But Glickenhaus and Shapiro, the guys who ran North American Pictures, got out of the film industry at a certain point because stars were just starting to get paid too much, and none of the economics seemed to make sense. So they got out of it. You know, they may have been making movies in the early 2000s, but you know, not much. I think their heyday was the mid to late 90s. You know, I'm sorry, the heyday was probably the 80s to the late 90s. So Billy Blanks plays the character of Jason Storm. Bobby Phillips plays the character of Zoe, who then becomes a TC-2000. It's sort of a light cyborg, 20% cybernetics, 80% real flesh and bone. Bolo Yeung plays Master Sumai. The question is what to do with this film. If I'm making a feature-length film called American Expendables, where does Billy Blanks and Bolo Yeung fit into this? Do these knockoffs matter? Let's say this is primarily a Terminator 2 knockoff. Does it matter in the canon of motion picture film? If it doesn't, maybe that's profound in itself. Maybe it's important to remember the literally thousands of films who are forgotten, who didn't make the bar into the future, who no one talks about anymore. You know, I would love to interview Billy Blanks. I don't know if he appreciates these films anymore. I don't know if maybe he sees them as a great time in his life. He obviously has been tremendously successful in his fitness franchise for many years. But the question is there enough meat on the bone if I make a documentary about these types of films? Another martial artist that Glickenhaus and Shapiro used a lot was Cynthia Rothrock. Cynthia Rothrock was the basis for the Mortal Kombat character Sonya Blade, and they based Sonya Blade upon Cynthia Rothrock. When she started doing films for North American Pictures, she did these Tiger Claws film, and by the time we get to the second and third film, they are essentially Mortal Kombat knockoffs. You know, it's a knockoff played by someone who the Mortal Kombat character was based upon to begin with, so is it really a knockoff? Cynthia Rothrock was a 5-time world champion at a weapons expert, and she beat out everyone at a time where there was no women's league. So she beat out all the men many, many, many times and is a famous world champion, and she has done films China with Michelle Yeoh and Sammo Hung, some of the greatest living martial artists. Cynthia Rothrock has been in there and held her own and sometimes excelled. And so she is a fascinating human being, underappreciated, I think. If you look at the film TC-2000, one of the things is Billy Blanks is the star of it, Phillips is the co-star. So you have essentially a film where it's fairly diverse, and if we look back in the direct-to-video area, I would actually say that was more common than people would admit to. We seem to have a bit of amnesia in this country when we look back, you know, because you look back at all the films and you're only thinking about like the top 20 films for that year, and you forget about the thousands of other films that had, you know, especially direct-to-video and independent, which have always had more diverse cast, and they've always done more, you know, they've always invented everything that the studio films then take from. So that's my train of thought right now. And exploring a few of these films, I'm going to watch Tiger Claws. There's actually 3 Tiger Claws films starring Cynthia Rothrock. And then in regard to Billy Blanks, there's he did a few films with Roddy Piper. So Billy Blanks was in The Last Boy Scout. You know, he's been in Tango and Cash, China O'Brien. That was a Cynthia Rothrock film. He was in Lionheart, King of the Kickboxers, Back in Action. So he did a movie with Roddy Piper called Back in Action, and it's him and Roddy Piper. So thanks everyone for listening to this. This is more of an experiment than anything. I'd be curious to know if this is worth listening to filmmakers out there. This is essentially just gathering a few facts, watching a few films, and trying to find things that are meaningful, things that overlap. I'm going to continue to explore the North American Pictures catalog, specifically some of the action films, to see what I can find here. I think it's more than just nostalgia. These are the B-list of action stars. The reason why I'm calling it American Expendables is that for every Van Damme and Seagal, there is like a Brian Bosworth or a Billy Blanks, or there's a Jeff Speakman, there's...
On the streets of New York's Chinatown stalks a new and deadly killer. A serial killer on the loose with ancient martial arts skills. Now, two of New York's toughest cops must use all their skills, all their knowledge, and all their courage to catch Tiger Claws.
There must be 10,000 martial artists in New York alone.
He's not a lunatic, and he's not out of control, and that's what makes him so dangerous. Don't ever underestimate him.
You did that with a sword?
No, it's hand. It's Tiger Claws. I've been accepted to train with them. Defend yourself. He came at me with the same pattern, but I need more time.
There's no more time.
You are the same.
We're not the same.
Jalal Marai, Cynthia Rothrock.
You look at some of the,
Bolo,
it's 30 years old now,
Tiger Claws.
right? I mean, released 1991, which is crazy. I mean, it makes me feel incredibly old. But I look at Cynthia Rothrock, who's clearly at her Cynthia Rothrockest, in this movie. She's svelte, she's kicking butt, very woman empowerment. I mean, that's really in the zeitgeist of movie making and even Disney films nowadays, right? The last several years, that's been a big thing.
I was actually thinking about this concept of, we do seem to be a culture that has amnesia, everyone's really pushing diversity very hard, and I think that one of the things is when they're looking at diversity in film and TV, the average person is not looking back that far, and they're not looking into anything but the mainstream. So if you're looking at the top 100 films of 1991, yeah, it's not going to have that much diversity. But in essentially the direct-to-video genre, the B-movie genre, there's a shitload. I mean, first of all, Cynthia Rothrock starring, Jalal Murray's Brazilian. You have Bolo Yeung, who's, Chinese, so... we just watched TC 2000, that's Billy Blanks and, a bunch of other people. So what you realize is that direct-to-video and independent and B-movies had a shitload more diversity because, like someone like Bolo Yeung, you might be able to cast, even though he was in like Double Impact and Bloodsport and Enter the Dragon, I mean, he's like a legend, but, it was like in the direct-to-video, it's like, oh, maybe we can get Bolo Yeung. He plays a lot of villains. Maybe we can get him, So I thought that was interesting too,
I found the imagery. Wow, 30 years does a lot for filmmaking. It really does. There's a whole different perspective on pacing, on the shots. Like I think you and I talked briefly before we started talking on the podcast about specifically like some slowness in the beginning, like the first 15, 20, it took some time to get going. It's almost like that old adage about writing a book, like, the first chapter you throw away because, you're just kind of getting going, right? You're getting the storyline moving. And what did surprise me about this movie is that outside of the montages, which I'll let you take the lead on that, but outside of the montages for the movie, I found that a lot of the shots, they were atypical, but they weren't, I didn't feel like there was anything going on that was over the top, like, say, what you'll call it, Samurai Cop. You know what I mean? Like, where just there was obviously gratuitous fighting scenes, but I really felt they were really well choreographed, and somewhat believable street fights, not these crazy things where people are on like pulleys and like, jumping up walls and stuff like that. I mean, I loved her over the head kicks. Those are believable. And then the Sonya move that she did. Oh, that was totally cool.
Yeah. So we should get into this. So this film came out a year before the Mortal Kombat game came out. And, Cynthia Rothrock is a legend in her own right. She's a 5-time world champion, undefeated weapons expert. And she competed at a time when there was no women's league. So she beat out all the men and all the women. So this is incredible. She's truly incredible martial artist, inducted into the Martial Arts Hall of Fame, and in China fought with Sammo Hung and Michelle Yeoh and all these legendary martial artists. So she's the real deal, and she did these films for North American Pictures in Canada, I believe, because I think that's where that company was out of, was Canada. She really knows what she's doing. She's similar to Chuck Norris in that Chuck Norris came out of, although he was more into fighting and less weapons demonstrations, but he was like a world champion who then got into movies, and Cynthia Rothrock was the same thing. She was a martial artist who then got into movies.
Right.
And so you can tell, when you're talking about the fight scenes, like, she's awesome in them. And the other guy, Joel Murray, also gifted martial artist as well. It just makes a huge difference, and I think that's what I get from these films. Like, they were trying to make exciting action sequences, and I remember growing up, and all you needed is if you watched a movie and there was a few crazy kicks in it, that's kind of all you needed. You go out in the backyard and then you try to do the kicks, and like, it just, expectations were just not, like, we didn't need that much growing up. You know what I mean?
Right. I mean, listen, this is pre, mainstream CGI like we see now, and people just had to kind of do their thing, and people had to use camera angles and jump cuts and stuff to make it believable, or speed up the film slightly, right? I mean, that's a standard too with a lot of these martial arts films from the 80s, right? They would speed it up a bit and create that extra energy. You're more technical about that than I am, but I imagine that's the case. And whenever I watch it, I'm like, that seems faster than human. So,
before I forget, I mentioned, because you mentioned the Sonya Blade kick that she does, right. And I mentioned Mortal Kombat, and there's a very good reason why I mentioned that, and that is because when they were creating Mortal Kombat, the character of Sonya Blade is based upon Cynthia Rothrock, and the basically developers said that. So and this is to sort of demonstrate how big of a deal she was. Johnny Cage was obviously Jean-Claude Van Damme, and Cynthia Rothrock was Sonya Blade, and then I think was it Kung Lao was Bruce Lee. So obviously,
right.
So they basically took her kick. You can see it, Tiger Claws. It's she puts both legs over the head and pulls the guy over. So they were influenced by Cynthia Rothrock, and then from what I understand, and I have to watch Tiger Claws 2 and 3, but those turn into more fantastical, where people are throwing like fireballs and stuff with their hands, and
more mysticism, that kind of thing.
Yeah, more mysticism in it, and it ends up being kind of parodies of Mortal Kombat, which is ironic because Mortal Kombat is that character's based upon her. So it ends up being a lot of give and take. But I found that really fascinating. You know,
I think if they had fast forwarded, say, 15, 20 years, and we were in the era of, social media, and, even as far back as like MySpace and like just getting into Facebook, it may have been a different thing for knowing who she is. You know what I mean? Like if there was more, in your face understanding of this personality, and finding out that she actually was the inspiration for a video game character that's iconic, I feel like more people would know about it,
Yeah, she's got like serious street cred, but it's definitely like, the average person would know who Jackie Chan is, but they might not know who Sammo Hung is, who's his sidekick, who was heavier guy, but could do just as crazy stuff,
Right.
And I think Cynthia Rothrock's like that. The other thing too is I believe that Tarantino, his Kill Bill series, obviously Uma Thurman is wearing literally Bruce Lee's outfit from Game of Death, but I think it's undeniable that Uma Thurman is partially like influenced by her character, is influenced by Cynthia Rothrock,
Yeah.
Given that Tarantino, I know goddamn well he's seen all her films, you know what I mean? Like there's just no way. But yeah, so that is an interesting thing, like this give and take between B movies and these mainstream movies. But the bizarre thing is, the only information I could find on Tiger Claws in regard to the budget is Jalal, who's Cynthia's like partner in the film. So he's also the producer, and he put in apparently $2.5 million into this film. And to be honest, that was a lot of damn money. And I when I saw the film, it's not that the film was made far better than I thought it was going to be, especially by the end. You realize that this really production value, it's not that much different than like a Seagal movie or a Van Damme movie in their prime, It's not that different from Double Impact or something like that, or Lionheart. So I get it, but I definitely, when I heard this was a $2.5 million film, I thought to myself, I can see $1 million, but 2.5 felt like a lot of money. But I mean, maybe they just had to pay the talent that much,
Yeah, I mean, also, did they make it back?
Yeah, and there's not a lot of information on that. Like Wikipedia doesn't have the box office or anything, because these films, I would assume, were released in the theater as well. Yeah, there's no box office information. But
they're not like a whatchamacallit, Charles Band direct-to-video group, right? Like that's not how they had a mainstream release.
They had theatrical, because they had produced films that had like Christopher Walken and Dolph Lundgren, but Dolph Lundgren coming off of like some of his higher profile stuff. So like, these guys, Glickenhaus and Shapiro, who were running North American Pictures, they got out of the film industry partially because it did become too expensive to pay some of these people.
Yeah.
So if they're paying like Christopher Walken like a certain amount of money, that the finances didn't really add up at a certain point.
Well, I mean that's evidenced in the 90s. I mean, when we were, really getting focused on and interested in film, you start seeing actors and actresses earning, $7, $10, $15 million a film. I mean, now you're talking, some people earn in excess of $20-30 million a film, and it's like, how can you justify that when there's an entire other staff and there's a profit margin that you're hoping for? I mean, effects budget and everything else. I mean, $200 million, laying out $250 million practically on something, like
that's going to be hard to do. I mean, now the major streaming sites have such a deep subscriber base that they can get away with that sort of thing on a few projects, but who knows what's going to happen? I mean, there's a lot of evidence to suggest a lot of the Marvel movies are just starting to bomb, so.
What's really good, back to this era, what's really good about it is that, for even even for 60 to 100 grand, if you had some, B or tertiary actors and actresses and, a decent story and a good crew, you could put together a great film. I mean, it's not going to be, rock'em sock'em, Hollywood-esque, but it's going to be a good story. You know what I mean? And the film quality is on par with what you would see coming out of Hollywood. You're just not going to have that extra polished look, right?
But let's say in this time period, the late 80s, early 90s. So Tiger Claws, obviously was shot on 35. It looked really good. We're seeing, I have a feeling if Troma, who acquired the film, could ever get a good transfer, this thing will look pretty good.
You think it would clean up from?
Yeah. If they can get the original negative, and I bet there is a print or a negative of it, they can, real film, motion picture film has a resolution, they say, of somewhere between 2.5 and 4K. I mean, it's essentially silver deposits,
right.
So it's more organic than defined pixel resolution. But
these films that we're watching, I stream this particular one on Amazon Prime. Is that a capture of a VHS tape?
I don't think it's a capture of a VHS, but it certainly was a standard quality. Yeah, if it was VHS, it would look like total dog shit. But I think it does. It looks like it's some kind of maybe Beta SP tape, standard definition.
Okay.
So if they can go back to that film print and scan it, it'll look gorgeous, and it'll retain a lot of the quality. Because they've even done that. The guy who runs Cinema Epoch, he rescanned Samurai Cop, and Samurai Cop looked way better. Like you're amazed at the resolution they can pull out of it.
Well, I often wondered how that happened. And I know this is a technical thing that's kind of slightly off topic, but it's just out of my curiosity. When you go back in time and you look at some of these movies, they were originally released on VHS, obviously.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then future versions were released to DVD, maybe not even, Blu-ray, because the quality wasn't there, right?
If you knew a film was going direct to video, you would still shoot it on 16 or 35 to retain that cinematic quality and to make it a product that someone would actually buy. Because at that time, late 80s, early 90s, the videos just looked purely electronic, like news, 30 frames a second. There's no in between. So you had to shoot on film to be taken seriously. And so, but in order to save costs, they'd have it typically, let's say, transferred onto Beta SP tape, something like that, which was like a broadcast standard. And then they would edit purely on tape, and they'd make a tape master. And at the time, it was high quality standard definition, but you lose an incredible amount of data because it's a standard definition electronic format versus actual motion picture film,
Right. And now with the phones that we have today, I mean, God, there's 4K cameras on the back of those, right?
Oh, yeah. They would look. Yeah, I mean, you're still not getting the quality of lenses and things like that, but I guess the point is, though, some of those films were never actually the films were never actually the negatives were never actually cut, so it doesn't actually a few canisters of film with the finished product on it doesn't exist. So they, unless someone could dig up the negative somewhere, redevelop the whole thing and put the whole film back together, a lot of these direct-to-video films just never had the only master is probably like a Beta SP,
Wow.
So
that's incredible.
I would say with some of these Glickenhaus films, I think because so many of them screened at least some kind of limited screening, they probably do have prints of all of these. And if they have prints of all of them, then we're going to see, if Troma could get their hands on them, we're going to see much nicer looking transfers.
Yeah. Back to the film. I kept expecting there to be some gratuitousness to it. I mean, 80s and 90s films were typical of, okay, you're going to do an action film, there'll likely be a sex scene, there'll be some nudity, there'll be a character development with the two main characters, blah, blah. They kind of left that out, They kind of focused on what they wanted to focus on, which was the fighting and the style, and that is like the forbidden style, and they had a little bit of a something at the end, which clearly they connected in some kind of relationship form, but like they didn't focus on that, which I kind of liked, because that's kind of the go-to in some of these. Like they get into these like really hot and heavy action sequences where their lives are at risk and whatever, and it defaults into this atypical of like, well, it's going to turn sexual for us because that tension exists because we're at the verge of death. You know what I mean? And it's just so typical. It's like I was kind of pleased to see that they de-emphasized that in this movie. I was like, oh, okay, cool.
Well, yeah, I like that too. Yeah, I mean the movie is like it's the directing is totally solid. It supports the visuals. Like, you can see they set up a dolly in some shots. The movements are good. Like they're using good lenses. Like, it's done on a much higher level than I expected, and the fact that there's 3 of them is really fascinating too. I don't remember seeing these films in the video store, not these ones.
Neither do I.
And that's a wonderful thing too. Is like, they shot what looks to be all in real locations. It doesn't look like they built any sets. I mean, they shoot in a movie theater, they shoot in a bar, they shoot on a boat, they shoot in what looks to be some kind of police office building type thing.
Right.
And it was just done. They definitely hit upon the Asian mysticism, right? Because Bolo Yeung, the villain, has this deadly claw technique he uses. They kind of push it to
almost hammy. Yeah,
hammy, like a mild superpower, like he's
the tiger roar, like when he starts attacking, right? Like it's borderline camp.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
It's almost super villain, right? It's like, but I also like the thing that there's a few, you could say, nuances in there where you see Bolo Yeung pop up, you kind of know he's the villain, and then later you see him like in the background of a shot, and he's like in this dojo, and he's like painting a mural, and he looks kind of nerdy, and I thought that was really interesting too, like
unassuming,
very unassuming, and as a plot device, it's kind of cool. I mean, the plot is basically someone is on a murdering spree, killing martial arts masters.
Yeah.
And these 2 cops have to delve into that world. And when you think about it, that's pretty badass, It's a cool idea,
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. They don't really delve into, necessarily why he chose his victims. They all seemed like, at least towards the end when you realize it's him and they stop hiding who's doing it and it's him doing it. It just seems like it's all spur of the moment, spontaneously, I'm just going to lose my shit and start killing people. You know what I mean? Like come across something, they discovered him, and like there's a scene towards the end of the movie where they realize he killed the dojo master there, and 3 of the people come out and he takes them all out too. And it's all, doing all this stuff. Now there's 4 people there and he's just like, kind of just like growling to himself and sitting at his, like laughing. And it's like, okay, clearly you're homicidal maniac. You know what I mean? That's been hiding behind this persona of this, mural painter.
Yeah. You know what the interesting thing is? I do think it would have been nice to hear some motivation from that character. Either the cops finding out his motive or him discussing more clearly his motive. I mean, obviously, he was taking trophies. I know that. He'd kill a master and he'd take a trophy, and he had his shrine.
Right.
And the shrine had the trophies on him, and he would do kata in front of the shrine.
In the clothing closet, by the way, behind the clothes, in some giant additional room filled with 1,000 candles that nobody seemed to smell, which to me was just brilliant.
On a nightly basis, it's just all back there.
Where'd he go? Nobody knows.
No one knows. He's painting back there. Leave him alone. But yeah, I could have used some exposition just about what his motive was. You presume he just wanted to be the top and kill all competition, but it would have been nice to hear it from that character,
Yeah, because the other movies like No Retreat, No Surrender from that era, similar style movie, right? Similar level of acting, early stages for Van Damme, right? Clear premise, like who's the better dojo, who's the best, who's the best student, who's the best master, that kind of thing. And that all piggybacks off of the Saturday afternoon, dubbed movies we saw as kids, right? I mean, literally, like most of the plot lines of those movies are all about like, my style is better than your style, and you disrespected my master, and there's this back and forth, and then there's this like turf war, and somebody dies, and then there's retribution,
or like hoodlums go into a dojo and say, I want to challenge your master. It's like that's the plot to like so many of these martial arts films. The roster of people in this film and other of these North American Pictures films is there's a lot of overlap because I was watching a Billy Blanks film, and Billy Blanks is in a few Van Damme films, including Lionheart.
Yeah, I recall that. Yeah,
and then Bolo Yeung's obviously in, I think, Double Impact and Bloodsport. It just was a different time period. We're talking about like A-list martial arts stars versus B-list, and it was kind of a blurry era. Like one of Seagal's and Van Damme's earlier films were not big, huge films.
Just basic, They were okay. We've got another up-and-coming, a rising star here. Let's throw him in a budget of X and see if it sticks. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and these films like played in theaters. This is what it was. I mean, you literally take Tiger Claws could have been playing in the theater, depending on the year it came on, alongside something like King of the Kickboxers or No Retreat, No Surrender, or something like that.
Right.
And yeah, you just realize that if you were in that time period, you like Van Damme wasn't Van Damme yet, probably in '91, or maybe he was getting there. But the point was, you might not go, like, you go into a movie theater and it's like it's this one playing or it's Bloodsport playing. At the time, these people may have not broken out in the way that you know them now.
Right.
You know?
I bet you, back to the technology, so No Retreat, No Surrender, and this movie, let's say that they're roughly the same time frame that they were released. I forget how much earlier No Retreat was. You were saying, I don't remember seeing this in the video store. Well, we remember the difference between, the full market value VHS tape versus sell-through, right?
85. So No Retreat was older. Yeah.
The thing about this, you're an independent video store owner. What are you going to do? Are you going to take a chance on a couple copies of a Van Damme movie with a guy that's coming up in the ranks, and spending money on that? And I'm sure that's what happened. You know what I mean? And because it wasn't sell through, and it wasn't in a format like DVD, which, ultimately you're not going to be paying $60 a pop copy. If you're going to pay in $20, $25 tops, you can get 3 of them for the price you would have gotten a VHS for. You're more likely to get like 1 copy of it and take a chance on it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. You're in that video store aisle, the Bloodsport. You already seen Bloodsport. You pick up Tiger Claws. You look on the back. It's the main villain from Bloodsport. Look, I'll rent this. And at that time, it probably worked really well. And we were thirsty for that.
Yeah.
If we were like, oh, fucking Billy Blanks from Lionheart, well, I'm gonna rent this.
Yeah.
You would totally do that. That's literally what we did.
Yeah. The second you saw somebody you liked, whether they're in something that actually bled into another genre slightly, you didn't really care. You know what I mean? You're like, great, I'll check it out. Let's see what he's doing with this, or she's doing with that. I found an interesting tidbit about her. She tries to work in every one of her movies that she's from Scranton, Pennsylvania, and that's legitimately where she grew up. So it sounds like just an anecdote of her character, but it's kind of like an Easter egg / homage to her childhood, which I found kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I know that basically I think she was a teen, and they just saw like she's just super athletic.
Well, started at 13. She started training at 13 years old, which is pretty awesome. And she's like a seventh level black belt in one particular style, which to me is just it's just mind-boggling. I 7th degree black belt in Tang Soo Do, and she holds 5 black belts. And she was the first woman to grace the cover of some martial arts magazine in 1983. It was the first time they ever put a female on the cover. So you talk about empowerment and everything, like dude, she was it,
Yeah, and the real deal. I mean, that's the thing, is that like most people in entertainment these days seem more like models who can act, unless you just have a look like you're Danny Trejo or something, Right. But even he got his fame because he could actually fight, But I would call Tiger Claws to some degree exploitation film, because what you're marketing is the action. And so you have people like Cynthia Rothrock or Billy Blanks or this guy Jalal Murray, and they're acting as functional, but they're not Gary Oldman and Meryl Streep. Their talent is martial arts and they can also act, but it is of the time, I'd say. You see this less with even Chuck Norris to some degree. I don't think no one would ever call him a great actor, I
mean, think about like Walker, Texas Ranger is probably some of the better side of his acting, because it was a TV series. There was narrative, you know what I mean? It's a drama action, right? But truthfully, if you go back to this era, what you're really doing is you're filling in between action sequences a narrative that connects the two, right?
Yeah.
And and the narrative is secondary. What you're really doing in these films is, when's the next fight? I want to know when the next fight is and why and what's going to lead up to it. And, what they're talking about, the fact that it's not real deep, I could give a shit less because I want to know who she's going to kick ass next. You know what I mean?
Yeah. This is interesting too. The other film I watched was this one called TC 2000, and it was kind of like a Terminator 2 knockoff. And they shot all in like factories and post-industrial stuff and used some, blue lighting to make it look futuristic. But the thing that was interesting was most of the action was people fighting, and usually only a couple people at a time. And in one sense, shooting an action scene, shooting a fight scene takes forever, and it's not easy, and people get hurt and needs to be choreographed, all that stuff. But that is still cheap. That's still probably the cheapest type of action because you're not blowing up a car or a house. In this one, they had a big explosion, I think, in the beginning, Tiger Claws. I think it was a boat or a house blows up or something.
It was a vehicle. The gentleman that was the martial artist that rolled the whole film, he shot the driver twice. The driver hit something that looked just like something empty, and the thing exploded like, I don't know, like just went off underneath it, full of like 400 gallons of gasoline. It was amazing.
Yeah, huge explosion. But that was, really, that was their big stunt. And back then, you're doing it for the film, but you're really kind of doing it for the trailer. That's
right.
You're doing it. That's exploitation. It's like, this is for the movie, but it's for the trailer.
Yeah. And it's like you go to the movie and you're like, oh shit, there's only one explosion, and I saw the trailer.
But it's an interesting concept, right? Like, action, fighting is entertaining, but in the grand scheme, less expensive than a lot of other things, and so it makes sense why these. Like, there was just so many of these action films because martial arts was super hot. There were McDojos on every corner. I remember I studied martial arts at Tracy Kempo for years, from high school into college.
I dipped my toe in there for a short period of time too.
Oh, did you? Yeah. It just, everyone loved it. Everyone was into it.
I got my yellow belt. That's what I got.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. I
passed the first test. I never could do like a roundhouse or anything like what this woman can do. Holy cow! Like, her range of motion and her ability to,
Oh, she could move, man. There's one shot. It's just her. She's standing, and then immediately she's doing.
Like a flying sidekick? That kind of
it's
thing?
like a flying sidekick. Like, immediately. It's like she's here, and then she's in the air with her leg tucked under, full extended leg.
And which is what IMDb says. She's done over 60 films. So, that's no small feat. And she's still relatively young. 61, 63, I think. She got a lot done in a very short period of time.
And she's, like, truly an athlete, which is interesting because you see, like, she posts stuff on YouTube and Instagram, and she's like scuba diving and doing all this. Some people are just wired like that. They're just athletes, like, their whole life. It's really interesting. Jalal Murray too was a producer on a lot of these films that are in the North American Pictures catalog. So that guy Jalal Murray would be amazing to talk to because he, him as the producer, not only bankrolling some of these, but putting them together would be invaluable because he might have, various stories about how these things came to be.
And he clearly had martial arts training and experience as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he was pretty nasty, man. Yeah, he had some good moves in there too.
An expert martial artist, an accomplished jeweler. Okay, these people are like so well rounded. It's incredible.
Yeah, I'd like to talk to Bolo Yeung too, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know if he's does interviews or whatever. But any final thoughts for you? Or
I think of all the ones you could have picked that I was to watch first and have a discussion and narrative with you, I think this is by far probably one of the best, because honestly, I went in with that 80s era expectations of, performance, narrative. And of course, I mean, there were, the sergeant sat on his words a few times, and, it's like, that's it. That's the only cut we have. We got to put it in,
right.
And it's like, but it's what's funny is that back then you didn't really care, and especially because of what I said earlier, which is the narrative was less important than the action. It was filling in. You're like, okay, whatever. They're going to have this blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, who are we going to hit next? You know what I mean? And that's why you kind of just, I don't know, you just kind of discounted it. You don't care. You're just waiting for the next fight. So I guess I give these movies from this era a little bit of a reprieve. And I probably beat up modern films a heck of a lot more, because there's an expectation like, look, I can go out and get a 4K camera today and spend, a couple $1,000s with some lenses, the base camera and everything else, and make a feature film of high quality. You know what I mean? So, and back then, I mean, you had to come up with many times that just to get the equipment on set.
I mean, you're burning. That's the thing, is you're burn, especially in those action scenes, shooting 35. You're burning money. Yeah. Now that I think about it, I get why it was so expensive to some degree. But I think that you can't put 2021 expectations onto a 30-year-old film. It doesn't make any sense. Mm-hmm. It was a very good action film for the year that it came out, and it hit the marks that it should have. And that's how they were made, and this was a good version of what that film was. It is fascinating, the change in expectations of performances, maybe.
I think if I title discovered this back in the early 90s, I think I would have followed Cynthia's career closer. And I'm sorry that it took this long to find her. But now that I have, I've got the curiosity of her other work, and we'll probably just keep going and checking out some more of it. Because she was clearly very good, and it was enjoyable.
After examining the films of North American Pictures, I can see these films were made for the direct-to-video audience, and the expectations were just far different 30 years ago than they are today. We can't judge these films by 2024 standards. We have to look at the audience they were created for 30 years ago. And when we do that, we see that these were really interesting martial arts films. The people that starred in them were professional martial artists. This is different than a lot of modern films, where actors learn martial arts and then act in a film. In any case, this has been an examination of Troma Entertainment's new catalog by North American Pictures. And to top off this documentary, we're gonna hear from Lloyd Kaufman and then Debbie Rochon. About to interview Lloyd Kaufman. Wish me luck. I mean, does anyone ever come out of the woodwork and say, "Hey, Lloyd, you done well"?
Stan Lee was a big supporter. He got us into Marvel Comics, and I was friends with him until he died. And John G. Avildsen, with whom I worked on Joe Cryuncle, Rocky, and we were lifelong friends. He was realistic, but he also would say to me, he told me I had a bad reputation and that there's no chance I'm going to get hired. But as a director on some bigger stuff, because obviously the stuff I do is rather personal.
They taunted him. They tormented him until he had a horrifying accident and fell into a vat of nuclear waste, transforming little Melvin into a hideously deformed creature of superhuman size and strength. Melvin became the Toxic Avenger, the first superhero born out of nuclear waste.
But he also, would say, "Hey, look what you've accomplished. You've got this company that's been going for all this time. You've created the Toxic Avenger and Sergeant Kabuki Man NYPD. There is a Troma universe: Dolphin Man, Class of Nuke 'Em Eye, the Cretans. But nobody cares. Nobody wants to care because there's not enough in it for them. New York Times wants the advertising, so they have to twist themselves into a pretzel to say that a zombie movie brought to you by 20th Century Fox, or the fifth iteration of Chucky, which isn't even a movie, you can't win. It's just, I don't know what more I can do. And the Toxic Avenger remake, let's see. I think that's going to be very good. But we're only minor players.
That director I like.
First of all, he's a great
actor, and then his movie I Don't Feel at Home This World.
Yeah, it's terrific. We are very fortunate, legendary. I knock on wood, but they get it. They get it, and Macon Blair gets it, and Dinklage was a Toxic Avenger fan. What's interesting is. I wanted to ask the cast when I was on set, did you hear of the Toxic? Most of them weren't even born when we made Toxic Avenger. And it's remarkable how many people enjoy the film. It's just, unless we have a huge amount of money and the right PR people, we're fucked. We're dead in the water, basically. The only reason Troma's still here is our fans. That's the secret sauce. Our fans, they book our theaters. They gave us money for hashtag Shakespeare Shitstorm. We got about 10% of the budget, which was, we got $35,000, not quite 10%, from Bad Dragon. Bad Dragon is a company that makes adult toys. And they gave us $35,000 just to help us as patrons of the arts. They didn't even ask for a piece of the movie because they knew that it wouldn't really be, it'd be better to buy Google stock. And the cast of hashtag Shakespeare Shitstorm, everybody on it was a Troma fan. And it was the greatest experience of my filmmaking career because everybody was so devoted to the movie. And we ended up making a $50 million movie for under maybe $500,000. We did 9 days in Albania. Terrific place to film.
So, yeah, why was that? Just cheap?
We got a deal we couldn't refuse, thanks to Justin Martell, who has a specialty of developing industries or travel or tourism in obscure new places. And he had a relationship with the Albanian government.
I was curious if there was any Shakespearean quotes, or even within Shitstorm, that you felt applied to you or Troma.
Oh, fuck yeah. I waited until I was in my dotage to tackle The Tempest. I would have done it when James Gunn was around, when we did Romeo and Juliet. But I wanted to wait till I was old, and boy, I'm Prospero for sure. It's a play that's druggy as hell and has a monster and it's got fairies and a beautiful love story and it's Troma all the way. So I'm Prospero and I feel it.
Our revels now are ended, and these, our actors, as I foretold you, are spirits and are melted into air, into thin air. And like the baseless fabric of this vision, the cloud-capped mountains, the solemn temples, the glorious palaces, the great globe itself, yea, all which it inherits shall dissolve.
Hi, I'm here with Mr. John Brennan, producer of Shakespeare's Shitstorm. How you doing tonight?
Thank you. I'm doing well, and I appreciate you speaking to me on this very prestigious evening where we've premiered hashtag Shakespeare's Shitstorm at the Museum of the Moving Image.
Well, this
has been humongously cathartic. We've been watching this movie on, computer screens and television screens for about 3 or 4 years. And this is the first time that I got to see the movie in a big screen with the sound and all that stuff, and to see it with a bunch of people and the laughter. And it's just a different experience. I mean, this is a communal movie, and it played really well. I mean, all the jokes that we wanted to hit, all the gags hit, and it was unbelievable. So I feel like, post-pandemic, this is the movie that you have to see in a theater. It's all about trying to bring people together. And Lloyd's message, essentially, for one of the themes is that if we all work together as the human race, that we'll get to a better place. Thank you for having me. This was absolutely a pleasure. And I just want to say quickly that I owe it all to Lloyd Kaufman, who gave me a shot to produce this movie. This was the second movie that I ever produced, second feature. And it's invaluable. I mean, the Troma system works. There's an old infomercial from the 90s called the Troma system. And the thing that they say throughout is, the Troma system worked for me. And for me, in my life, that absolutely is true. The Troma system worked for me. Not many people have done what Lloyd and Michael Herz and Troma have done over the course of 50 years now. And it's hard to deny. They never really sold out. I mean, selling out is one thing, but they never really were betrayed their own hearts, is what I'm trying to say. And they made movies the way that they wanted to make them, and they made movies that they wanted to see. And a lot of people give that up in order to get a glory or a paycheck or something. So they've always been true to themselves, and I respect that about Troma, and I hope it keeps going. I hope that Lloyd and Michael can keep it going for the next younger generation, and get those people inspired, and get the next, like Lloyd says, the next James Gunn's and things like that out there. Sometimes it's good to give yourself away for free. I came to Troma as a editing volunteer, and I edited some of Lloyd's Make Your Own Damn Movie stuff. And I guess he liked it, so I stuck around. Then I got to be his assistant, did that for a few years. Then I got to produce a couple of his movies. So with that, I then got to get on a TV show called The Last Drive-In with Joe Bob Briggs, because I met Justin Martell and Matt Mangiarines. So I owe a lot to Troma. I owe a lot to Troma, and I would like to say that Lloyd is such a generous guy, and I wouldn't have the career that I have without him. So thank you, Lloyd.
Well, thank you very, very much. But you guys, you certainly paint your dues, and that's the thing. It's like a film school in a way. It's the Hudson School of Painting, the Troma School of Filmmaking kind of. Except, we actually pay you a little bit.
Stand up, please. Give yourself a round of applause. It took hundreds of people to make this movie, and without all these people are very important.
Have something to say. Like, figure out who you are as a person. That's the most important thing. Whenever you see somebody that you admire, think of this. Are they original, or are they imitating somebody else? Not influenced, but imitating. So you don't want to say, oh, I want to be Quentin Tarantino, and then try to copy him. Will never happen. I want to be Rob Zombie, copy him. It's not going to happen, because they did what they wanted to do. So you must embrace the fact of uniqueness and individuality. And then people will take notice of your work. I'm extremely pro New York, because I feel like everybody that I know personally that's a filmmaker in New York has something to say. Like Larry Fessenden, he has a lot to say in his movies. You know, even if they may not be like gross out movies or considered exploitation, but they're always about the environment or something within a horror movie. And Lloyd is always about the political statement, and everybody I've worked with in New York has something to say. And I find that very you in LA unless they're part of a very particular clique. I don't think there's a lot they're saying. So I would rather be in the trenches with New York filmmakers any day than, have some kind of a name in Hollywood and be doing kind of meaningless stuff. So at the end of the day, what's going to be remembered, what's going to be cool, what's going to be interesting, that I'm proud of, and it's always been East Coast.